This episode was brought to you by Nail It and Scale It, the world's leading fast growth program for business. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Unstoppable. Today we have Graeme Cowan. Those of you listening today are in for an absolute treat. He's the co-founder and leadership speaker at Factor C. He works with senior leaders to build more caring and resilient teams from organisations like Queensland Health, Macquarie, EY, NAB, just to name a few. And prior to that, Graeme's experience, he worked in senior leadership positions with Johnson & Johnson, Pfizer, as well as AT Kearney. He's a board director of Are You OK? And is the host of the Caring CEO podcast. Wow, that sounds incredible. And he interviews senior leaders who strive for a culture of care and high performance. And today we are going to learn more about Graeme, his story, but also find out more about in 2000 where he crashed and burned and went through a 5-year episode of depression, including 4 suicide attempts. And his psychiatrist at the time described it as the worst he had ever treated, yet he is here today inspiring thousands and helping so many people. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the podcast, Graeme Cowan. Graeme, great to have you here, mate.
Great to join you, Kerwin.
Mate, and thank you for being here. It's an honour to still have you here in our presence, but more importantly, doing the work that you do. Mate, one of the things I always ask my guests, and I'd be really curious to hear your response when they come on, is let's say you show up at a dinner party. There's 8 other people sitting around a table. No one knows who you are. Okay, but all of a sudden the conversation goes quiet. Someone turns to you and says, Graeme, so what do you do? How do you answer that question?
I say that I'm a resilience speaker and author, and I help leaders build more caring and resilient teams who enjoy growing together. That's what I typically say.
And resilience, that's a big part of what you do now, yeah?
Yeah, it is. And, I had some very traumatic events in my life, which really made resilience a very important component of what I do now and how I stay on track.
So when you tell your story about your life, mate, where does it begin? Like, where does it all begin for you?
Well, I grew up in the country, a little town called Taree on the north coast of New South Wales, and had a great time there. Swimming and playing footy, cricket, all that sort of thing, and then came down to Sydney and went to university there. Then got into marketing with Johnson & Johnson and Pfizer. And
is that what you studied at university? You studied marketing?
Yeah, I did. Yeah. Yeah, and that's even though I don't directly work in that area now, I obviously use it a lot in helping to promote what I do and to share the message.
And so, how did you get into the area or the field of marketing? Like, what led you to want to study marketing at university?
I think I was interested in psychology and influence, and and I remember some very interesting studies we did. We once were asked to get beer drinkers to evaluate beer blindly in a hotel. And so we covered all the beers up and everyone claimed they only drank Tui's or only drank Reshes or whatever. But the bottom line is they couldn't tell the difference. So that was a really interesting finding. And I did really enjoy my time with marketing because it's about trying to influence behavior.
And so then you left after studying marketing, you got your degree, you went into the corporate side.
Yeah.
And you started working for the big companies.
Yeah, with Johnson & Johnson and Pfizer. And they were really, really good training organizations. You learned a lot there. It was very professional. And I really enjoyed that area. But I worked there for probably about 6 or 7 years. Then I went into recruitment and culture change. Right. And career coaching. So,
Yeah, right. And so at what point did you, because I know you had that, you went through a crash and burn in 2000. What was that coming off the back? What was the work that you were doing at that time?
At that point, I was working as a executive search consultant, a headhunter. And
right.
At that point in time, there's a real crash in the market. It was the tech crash, the long time ago tech crash. And I crashed and burned myself. In a very short period of time, I lost my job. My marriage broke down, became estranged from my kids. And it was just a really very, very difficult 5 years where I just never thought that I would come out of it.
And was there a trigger for that? Like, had you had at this point a history of any kind of mental health?
Yeah, I'd had probably 5 episodes in my life of
Okay.
mental health problems, but this was by far the worst. It lasts for so long. I tried so many things, psychological counseling, medication, ECT or shock therapy. I tried everything.
Yeah, wow.
Mm.
And so that was obviously quite a journey for you, and it sounds like it was possibly a bit of a traumatic one as well.
Yeah, it was very, very traumatic. And but it's interesting now. I now see it as a blessing in a way, because it really
Yeah.
forced me to understand what was really important to me. And part of my pathway out of it was, how can I share the lessons I learned? And so that led to me writing a series of books, Back from the Brink, and a number of those became bestsellers. And that then led to people asking me to speak in regional areas. And now most of my work is done in the corporate area, working with keynote addresses or online training in the corporate area, all trying to improve personal and team resilience.
And so now this is a big part of your purpose. Your experience has obviously shaped you. It's given you a very unique perspective. And I'm assuming with the work that you do now, you help other people that are perhaps in similar situations. So I guess out of curiosity, like, what was it that, because you now obviously work with the Caring CEO podcast,
Yeah.
but you're also the board director of Are You Okay? Just on the Caring CEO podcast for a moment, I'm going to assume based on your experience, there were perhaps some things that you've identified post episode that your employer could have done to perhaps be a little bit more supportive, with the situation that you were going through. And I'm going to assume, post this event, you've learned a lot about the workplace. You've learned a lot about mental health and how mental health, the workplace, can implicate, but also support that process. What are some of the biggest things that you've learned when it comes to, us as business owners, and some of the things that we can do to support the mental health of our team, but also at the same time, and I'll follow that up with a different question afterwards, build resilience?
Well, one of the things that I've really reflected on was asking people to think about some of their amazing teams they've been part of. And it doesn't matter whether it was in a football team or netball, or when they worked at McDonald's, or this role. And I asked them about what made it unique, and always the same responses come up. People say, we enjoyed ourselves, we had a common vision, we had complementary strengths. But then I ask, did you care about each other? And always overwhelmingly the answer is yes. And so this really sent me on a bit of a journey about why care is so important and how it radiates across a business. And it's very interesting. This is also backed up by science. Gallup, the engagement survey group, have found that the biggest predictor of high profit, high productivity, high customer service levels is a positive answer to this: my supervisor or someone at work cares about me as a person.
Ooh.
And it was a real journey, and there's all that sort of theory around it, but I thought, how can I really prove to people that this actually happens? And so that led to me starting the Caring CEO podcast. And myself, my team have just interviewed some amazing leaders, really humble leaders, but just achieving great things.
And so what are you seeing because I think mental health is one of those things that gets talked about a lot, but it still gets swept under the carpet in most situations. Most employers, let alone employees, don't always feel comfortable, or more importantly, safe, to be able to bring to work, some of the problems that they have. I know in our organization, we have, a bit of an ethos where it's like, I don't want you to leave your problems at home. I want you to bring them to work, because they're, as far as I'm concerned, that's baggage that you're holding on to that is going to slow you down. And if I can help you relinquish or unpack, some of that baggage, then you're only going to perform at a higher level. Why do you think there is still, to this day, especially after so much education, such a stigma, around not just mental health, but also the ability to be able to talk about it in environments like the workplace? Because a lot of people, probably say, well, yeah, I've got some mental health issues, and a lot of it is exacerbated by my workplace, but I wouldn't be game to bring it to my boss, in case that positioned me as someone who's weak that could be then made redundant or, performance managed out or even exited.
Yeah, there is still great stigma around mental health. There's been both great progress in terms of communication across the community and that sort of thing. But I still think some people feel that it's a weakness. And one of the things as part of my journey, I did a lot of research, and there's a book called A First-Rate Madness by an American psychologist called Kerwin Amini, a funny name. But what he did was really look at some of the extraordinary leaders in our time, and people like Abraham Lincoln, like Gandhi, like JFK, like Mother Teresa. They were all people that had really difficult times, really big instances of mental illness. But his thesis in this book was that they were great leaders, not in spite of those mental illnesses, but because of them. And what he was really able to determine was that many of those people, through going through these really horrific experiences, learned much more about themselves. They had a greater presence and more resilience. And also they really had, they could really talk about reality and not be overly optimistic or overly pessimistic. And so that was some of the insights that I think really changed things. But also in my podcast, I interviewed, for example, Mike Schneider, who's the CEO of Bunnings. He oversees 60,000 employees.
Wow.
And Mike talks about his 4 H's of leadership. And the first thing is honest, humble, helpful, and happy. And he's also interviewed me for the staff at Bunnings. And he talks honestly about the coaching he gets. He gets coaching for his running, he gets coaching for his business, and he gets coaching for stressful times, and talks about having a psychologist. And you see people like that talk about this is part of our life, and we're still doing great stuff. And Bunnings is the number 1 most respected corporate brand in Australia. And I don't think it's in any small part because of his approach and his humility.
So because I'm going to assume one of the reasons that a lot of employees don't feel safe to bring it is, not just the stigma, not just the fear, but also the feeling that maybe my workplace isn't a safe place to be able to share this kind of, information about myself. But when you talk about care, as being one of the key ingredients when it comes to high performance, care implies that there's a level of, interest that might promote safety, so that people can feel more comfortable to talk about these things. But from your experience, and it sounds like you've got a lot, what does care look like in the workplace? Whether you've got, whether you're a one-man band with just an assistant or 3 or 4 or 5 players on your team, or whether you've got 60,000 people, like the CEO of Bunnings, what does care look like in the workplace?
Well, it leads to connection and engagement and feeling part of a tribe. And we all have a basic human need to feel part of a tribe, with our family or in work or with colleagues or sport. We really have this need. But it's a lot more than that even, Kerwin. Google have done a lot of research about what's the core of their best teams. They spent millions of dollars, and at first they thought it was the individuals in the team, but what they actually found was how the teams work together, and they identified 5 areas or 5 norms of these best teams. And the number 1 was psychological safety, and what that means is that I can be myself. I don't have to act. I can be my authentic self. I can try new things. I can take risks. If things don't work out, we'll learn from it, move on. And that's the core to innovation. And, I've seen your work and the way that you talk about groups work as well. And we may use different language about it, but there's a commonality in that when we feel connected, when we enjoy each other's company, when we can be, supportive of each other, it makes the group much, much stronger.
So what does psychological safety look like in the workplace? How would you be able to, let's say, for example, there's an owner listening to this right now going, okay, well, the 5 norms, first one is psychological safety. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. I know when I feel safe, I, tend to be more of myself and perform at higher levels. But how, as owners, do we create psychological safety in an environment like a business when we may not feel psychologically safe ourselves?
Well, it's what needs to happen. And of course, the owner or the team leader has the biggest say in this, and they set the example. And psychological safety is very fragile because what it means in a team meeting is that everyone speaks approximately equally. So everyone feels that they can provide input into what's happening. Doesn't mean it's a democracy. Everyone feels free to try new things, take moderate risks to better serve customers or colleagues, and know that if it doesn't work out, there's not a really severe thing that happens. We say, what can we learn from this? How can we move forward? And what that does, if we do have high psychological safety and high performance pressure, we're in the learning zone. Whereas many organizations I work with have low psychological safety and high performance pressure, and that puts them in the anxiety zone. And when we're in the anxiety zone, or what I call the red zone, we just think very much in black and white. Whereas when we're in the green zone, where we have a positive mood, we're 31% more productive, 37% more influential, and 300% more creative, according to Harvard Business Research. Wow. So, there's compelling reasons why this needs to be part of the new workplace, a workplace that can thrive going forward.
I think there's going to be a lot of people now hanging on this conversation going, okay, the 5 norms, that was number 1. What are the other 4?
Well, this is the crux of it. Number 2 is dependability. So if someone on the team says they do something, they take ownership and they deliver. Number 3 is clarity. So everyone has a clear understanding of the goals involved and the landmarks along the way. Number 4 is meaning, which means that we relate to the purpose of the organisation, and then number 5 is impact, that we feel confident that our team is delivering on the purpose of the organisation. But why psychological safety is so important is that
it's like the foundation, isn't it?
Yeah, but it's just say number 2 is dependability. Well, if you don't have psychological safety, everyone's covering their ass, making excuses, all this sort of stuff. With psychological safety, it means that you can have robust discussions with respect and, agree to what we can do. There's no hidden agendas or politics to try and look better than others. It's a mindset where our mindset is we're great rather than I'm great.
So it's interesting, resilience and grit, that's one of those, I guess you could say, concepts that's grown in popularity over the last few years, especially after Angela Duckworth-Smith's presentation at, TED, quite a few years ago, where she broke down grit, and then we hear the stories of elite professional athletes and, special operatives and the training that they get to be able to, work in high performance scenarios. A big part of what you do is training people on developing resilience. So before we jump into resilience, why do people need resilience, especially with in the areas that we're talking about here?
Well, it really comes down to I think the massive rate of change that every workplace faces. If you're not continually changing, you're not doing great work. So that's a big thing. And also, in COVID times, uncertainty has been really amplified as well. And, I've done like 142 webinars in the last 18 months. And I survey everyone what they found most stressful over the COVID period, and it's uncertainty. It's the biggest area. And so what we really try to get people to focus on is the certain things. And that's about building resilience. And what can you control? What can you do each day? Because what resilience is the capacity to bounce back and improve your mood. And there's a professor, Sonia Lyubomirsky, who wrote a book called The How of Work. And she said that our mood, or what psychologists call positive affect, is affected by 3 things. The first thing is our genetics, and that contributes 50%. Some people are just born more robust, more happy than others. The second thing is the events that happen in our lives. So that's only 10%, believe it or not. It's only 10%.
Wow.
40% is our intentional actions, what we choose to do each day. And so that's what I describe as resilience is, what you have control over, what you choose to do each day.
And so how do you, because it's interesting, because that was actually going to be my next question, because a lot of people say, well, I just don't have resilience. I don't think it's within me. And I was going to say, okay, well, is resilience something that people are born with, or is it something that people can learn? And you're telling me right now that there's about a 50% of the game that can be learned, that people can learn resilience. 50% is made up of genetics. So it's a 50-50 shot. You're either born with it or you're not. But if you're not, you've still got, the capacity to develop it. Now, when you look at elite professional sports, or when you look at, special operations in the military, they've got certain things that they do to train people to develop resilience, or more importantly, to be able to measure resilience and quantify where someone's at, which is obviously in most cases going to be very different to the corporate world or to the rest of the world. We're not confronted with physical violence, although in our heads sometimes it might feel like we are. How do you train for resilience in an individual or a team where perhaps there is a lot that's lacking? They don't seem to be able to bounce back quick. They don't deal with uncertainty well. Because one of the things, and I'm going to pivot here a little bit in this conversation, one of the things that, people say to me is, can I train someone for resilience, or should I hire someone who's resilient? Now, again, I'd be asking you that question. Now, as an owner, should we be looking for people that already have, developed levels of resilience, or should we be looking for people that, we see potential to be able to develop resilience in?
Yeah, well, you're cutting a lot of the market out if you choose to cut out people that aren't born with those genetics. But the thing is, if you do the right things each day and you make sure that you are topping up your glasses of resilience and well-being, people can make an amazing contribution. The things that I think are really critical factors is how well people work in a team environment, and how well they encourage each other to really build their own resilience. And what I talk about, because I've had 5 episodes of depression, I've got a real predisposition, so I'm really very determined to do the right things because I go back. And what I talk about is really 3 elements of our well-being and resilience. The first is vitality. That's our physical health, exercising well, eating well, resting well, being able to recharge ourselves each day. The second component is intimacy. And this is our relationships we have around us. And the longest well-being study ever done is something called the Harvard Grant Study. And you can see a TED Talk on this. And they've been following the same group of 230 people for over 70 years. They have terabytes of information on each of these people. Most of them have died now. If you do the maths, they're in their high 90s. But the one overwhelming message that comes from this is the people that have the longest life, the most affluent life, the best sex life, are those that have caring and supportive relationships around us. So having those strong relationships is really, really foundational. And for those relationships, I really talk about 3 important areas. A couple of them are really straightforward. The first is it's a positive experience. So you have people around you that support you, you support each other. It's a positive experience around you. The second is that it's consistent. It's not once every 6 months. It's consistent. You see them regularly. And a lot of people have that as well. But the third component is where men in particular often slip up, and it's, can you be vulnerable with that person as well? Can you talk about going through a tough time? So they're the foundations of building what I call your care crew. A group that supports each other, encourages each other, etc. And the final element of well-being and resilience is what I call prosperity. And this is our contribution to the outside world. It can come through our career, or working for a charity, or donating time to a school, or looking after a family. All this stuff outside us builds our own well-being. And so it's vitality, intimacy, and prosperity. And so I tell people you have to live like a VIP. And living like a VIP is consciously topping up those glasses of well-being every day, because it's just like a 3-legged stool. If you haven't got all 3, up there, you're likely to fall over. And so resilience is consciously making the effort to top up those three areas, every single day.
And so as an employer, because one of the things I've discovered is, sometimes I can see things that my team can't, again, depending on their experience, their maturity, not necessarily always wrapped up in age, but sometimes, I could be working with an individual, or other owners could be working with an individual and go, okay, this person needs to develop some resilience. Okay. And so what you've given us now is a roadmap. Okay. So there needs to be a focus on vitality. There needs to be a focus on intimacy and relationships and prosperity and contribution. But what does that look like in, let's say, a practical rollout? And let's say I've got a team over here. There's 4 people in this team. I need to develop some resilience with them. I've got my roadmap of vitality, intimacy, and prosperity. How do I put that into the practical world to go, okay, we're going to do one thing every single week, in order to develop resilience? What would that look like?
Well, it's really planning the week, Kerwin. And what I have here is my VIP weekly planner. And so once every Sunday, usually for about half an hour, I just sort of sit down and say, okay, when am I going to do my physical health stuff? When am I going to do my exercise? When I'm catching up with people? The intimacy is saying, okay, I've got my care crew. That's about 7 people. Who haven't I caught up with recently? Do I have a coffee or a beer or a catch up over Zoom in COVID times? And then prosperity. What are the big rocks that I want to knock over this week? And so I consciously plan each week and then each day, put various elements of that together.
So as an owner, what you're suggesting is I can actually provide the framework where I am encouraging. I know in our organisation, we haven't since COVID, but we used to bring in a personal trainer 3 times a week. So, one thing we can do for our team is not only encourage them to exercise, but create opportunities for them to engage in exercise. The second area is the intimacy, and it kind of relates to what you were saying before around psychological safety. And we as owners, we do have the ability to build relationships with our team and develop levels of intimacy with our team, but also at the same time, from what I'm hearing, have the ability to coach team members on their relationships outside of work at the same time. And the prosperity component, the contribution, that's really about being able to help them measure the impact that they're making in the organization. And through proper planning, that makes it really easy to do. That is probably the most simple 3-step process around developing resilience that I think I've ever seen. So what are the biggest mistakes that you see people make when it comes to developing resilience and grit?
It all really depends on the individual. Like, as part of this, I also have a self-care snapshot, and that has 5 questions in each of the 3 categories: the vitality, intimacy, and prosperity. And, one of the things that I often ask people is, which is your emptiest glass? And it varies, quite often it's the vitality glass, but also a lot of people, it's also the intimacy. They realize that they don't have really strong, authentic relationships. And, I know prior to my breakdown that, I had good friends, but I was never able to be really vulnerable with them. And, since I have come out of it, I really make an effort or have rituals each week where I can do this. So, for example, I meet every Thursday morning, this morning, with a good mate, Richard, who's a partner at KPMG, and he lives close. And we just have, great walk every morning. We can talk about business. We can talk about what's going wrong in each other's lives. Like, he's got a very ill son at the moment, and we support each other. On Sunday, I meet with 2 other mates, and we go for a run from Curl down to Manly. So having rituals in your week where you can often kill 2 birds with one stone. Like, men, I think, like to do stuff. And so, the great conversation, the vulnerability can come as an offshoot of exercising together or doing something together. But it just pays to think about, who can I call at 2 a.m. and ask for $10,000? And if I don't have someone in that category, how can I build relationships? How can I build more consistency, build more vulnerability in some of my relationships to increase that bond and that support? Because those relationships are our scaffolding. When things go wrong, if we have good friends around us, they can help to hold us up. And, I still have mental health challenges, but I'm able to say now, I've been doing a bit much. if you want to help, let's go for a walk and do that sort of thing. And being able to let people know how they can support you is a really important element of that as well.
So it seems to me you're someone who's been in the trenches, but you still have to get in the trenches. And I think that's where I think your information is probably more practical than anyone else's, because you're not just talking about this from the third party or the third person. This is something that you've not only lived with, but you still continue to live with. Mm-hmm. You mentioned something earlier about rituals. What are some of the other rituals that you engage in on a regular basis that you have found that have not only supported your development of resilience, but also supported your mental health and performance?
Definitely meditation. That's the first thing I do every single day. It's like I rise usually around 5:30, and it's the first thing I do because I just know it's foundational to my health. It really is. And when I think about starting to have declines, it's usually when I haven't been meditating or haven't been exercising. So, I've, been over to an ashram in India. I've, practiced different types of meditation, and I just make it the number one thing I do. And it just starts the day off really well.
What style of meditation do you do at the moment?
I have tried a few. I've tried a group called the Brahma Kumaris, which is a spiritual meditation. I've done other guided places, but what I've really settled on, and there's a great app for doing this, it's called Insight Timer. And on Insight Timer, there's a 40-day mindfulness meditation put together by Jack Cornfield and Tara Brach, two real legends in Western Buddhism. And they just had this great course. It's free, where you can listen for 10 minutes, and they provide elements on how to be more present during the day. And actually, something really interesting happened this week, Kerwin. My gym owner, where I go to, he sent out a newsletter, and he quoted you. And what he said was that, you thought, what's the greatest gift I can give my son? It's to be present. And so to be present, I'm going to go without alcohol and sugar. I'm paraphrasing, but that's what I recall. Yeah. Is that a true story? Is that
true story? Yeah. On his 7th birthday in January this year, I was lying in bed on the night of his birthday, and I was just, because I'd already given him his gift, and I was like, what else can I give him? And I thought I can give him the gift of presence and my attention and my calm. And I was like, okay, what are the things that are getting in the way from that? And it's like, whether I'm drinking alcohol once a week or twice a week, I always wake up feeling a little bit shitter and a little bit more reactive. Sugar, same thing. And also, just processed foods. And I just made a commitment, and it was originally going to be a month. Because I found myself, it was originally going to be a week, and then I found myself negotiating with myself, and I was like, no, he's my son. He's worth more than that. And then I went for a month, and then, I ended up topping almost 18 weeks.
Wow. I love that story. I think it's fantastic.
Thank you. It means a lot. He means a lot to me. And, and I think oftentimes when we're dealing with our own stuff, we need to find reasons to do things. And I know for me, sometimes in my journey, I want to do it for myself, but there are some times in my journey where I don't. And so I find sometimes, bringing a value in that is beyond myself has been really helpful.
And tapping into purpose is so important for that, isn't it? If you have a noble purpose about wanting to be better for your parents or for your child or for your partner, it's a really good reason to do it. Really good reason.
So what's your purpose today, mate? Why do you do what you do?
It is really, about helping to make more supportive, more caring, more resilient groups, be that for family, be it for work, be it for a community you're involved in. And that's what I really, and part of that is helping people, or giving insight to managing their mood, knowing how to bounce back, knowing what to do to improve our mood and to be in a better place for those around us. So, we all know intuitively that we are better parents, we're better friends, we're better workmates when we are in a positive mood. And so it is really worth doing the things that can improve our mood.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I I see myself as someone who's been very privileged because of, with the reach that I have in social media now. Because, and then what's really interesting, go back 5 years ago, I had, 6 years ago, I had almost no reach. I was almost completely unknown apart from the work that I do. Now we have an incredibly blessed reach. But it happened, I think, the first time maybe 4 years ago, where we were publishing videos. And, I talk about a whole range of concepts, not just business. I'm talking about mental health. I'm talking about addiction, ADHD, relationships, parenting. I just talk about the things that I'm really passionate about. But it was about 5.5 years ago that I received my first message that I've probably received now a couple of thousand of, from an individual who says, Kerwin, I just want you to know you've just saved my life. I set out my day to die. I got everything ready. I was going through the process and I was working toward that day. And the day before I had planned my day to die, I came across one of your videos, and that video impacted me. It changed my perspective. It changed, my mindset, and I just wanted to send you a message and say thank you. And since then, I've received probably a few thousand messages like that. And I've kind of contemplated, especially, when COVID came out, I was like, fuck, live events are dead. Maybe I should just, take all the work that I've done and, I don't need to work anymore. And I found myself feeling very obligated in a pure way to continue to do what I do, because when you start getting 3, 4, and I'm sure you've experienced this yourself in your own work, when you start getting 3 or 4 messages a week or more from people who attribute you saving their life to just a fucking video, it blows my mind. And I sit back and I reflect, because these aren't just people, these are mothers. These are fathers, these are sons, these are daughters, grandparents. These are people that if they were, all of a sudden taken away, there would be, significant family units that would be affected, or there'd be family units that would be affected significantly. And so I've always considered what I do to go beyond just making money, go beyond just, building businesses. I see myself as having a responsibility now to really help people, at large. But I'm curious from your perspective, because there could be a few people listening to this right now who have contemplated suicide, or are even right now contemplating it in this moment as they listen to this. And as someone, and I can sit there and I can say, well, I've thought about taking my own life, but I've never done it seriously. I've had suicidal thoughts, but I've never attempted to take my own life. I've thought in the past, gosh, life would be so much better if I just wasn't here. But I look at someone like yourself who is still here. You've had 4 suicide attempts. You talk very openly about it. But what I'm curious to know from you is, it's a 2-parter. Part 1, if someone listening right now is in that state of, thinking that their life has no meaning, no purpose, and they want to take it, what is one of the best things that they can do to support themselves in this moment in order to get to the other side, like you have on many occasions?
Yeah, no, I also have lots of messages I've received.
I bet you do.
And the reason that I'm so passionate about my work and sharing my story is that I know when I share my story, it invites other people to share theirs. And everyone has a story. That's what I've learned. Everyone has a story, whether it's them personally or someone close to them, someone who's been through really, really difficult times. And one of the reasons I was so passionate about, getting on board and helping to start Are You OK? Was that, I had felt that way. Like, I seriously felt that I would never get better. I seriously felt that my family would be better off without me. And when you're in that mental state, and if there's people who there could be in this mental state, you just don't think rationally. And it's just crazy to think that your family would be better off without you, but that's what you do think. And so my message is that, there is absolute hope. And what I would say is, don't try to think too far ahead. Just think about the next week. What can you go for a walk every day? Can you catch up with a friend and go for a walk? Can you, go and seek help, see a doctor or a psychologist to start getting you on the right track? And that's where really my weekly planning started. It was about thinking about the week ahead, not trying to think any more than that. That's all you want to look at. And so what I'm going to do on Monday, what I'm going to do on Tuesday, and then to be grateful at the end of each day, to force yourself to think of, no matter what sort of day you had, what 3 things you're really grateful for. And that does start to change your mind and your mindset. And sometimes it can also be medication for people as well. Medication can make a big deal. But I never advocate making that your only source of hope and action, because it is, exercise, it is resting, it is relating to people, and it is having just a little sense of purpose, whatever that could be.
And there is so much evidence now. There is so much medical science now pointing to, things like the effectiveness of exercise.
Absolutely.
When it comes to, as an antidepressant, even the effectiveness of cold exposure, as an antidepressant, being in some cases significantly by multiples, whether it be exercise or cold exposure, more effective than medication itself. But yeah, I agree. There are situations where medication is required. What advice would you give to the support people? Perhaps the people who are now listening to this and going, okay, that's not me, but that's my husband, that's my wife, that's my son, that's my daughter. What are some of the best ways that the support network can help individuals who are affected in this way?
Yeah, well, when I came out of my bad depression and launched my first book, it was launched by John Brogden, the Black Dog Institute, and it just led to a massive wave of publicity. I did about 150 interviews. But what I learned from that in talkback radio and in speeches I gave was that it was often the carers that came up, because the people going through it had somewhat lost hope, and the carers were really active, of course. But what I've learned to say, and my second book was specifically for carers, is to have a mindset that self-care isn't selfish. You've got to take care of yourself. You've got to make sure that you have fuel in your own tank. You've got to put the gas mask on yourself first, because if you let that run down, you can't help the other person. So that's the first real lesson. The second thing is to try and guide the person by asking questions, not being, you should do this, you should do that. Have you thought about seeing a psychologist? Have you thought about seeing an exercise physiologist to help you get on exercise again? And there also are some great support groups that can help carers. Carers New South Wales, they get a whole lot of supports for people that do this. And just being around other carers can be really helpful. It's, being able to share and people completely understanding where you're coming from can be very, very reassuring as well.
One of the things that I'm seeing coming through, and it's not cut through completely yet, but I'm hearing about it being used, as treatments for mental health. I'm hearing about it being used as treatments for, things like addiction as a part of other treatment plans. Nutritional therapy. We hear about the importance of the gut and how the gut produces, X percentage. I'm not sure if it's 60 or 80% of the serotonin in our bodies. How important have you discovered nutrition is? Because anyone can exercise, okay, but if, one of the things that I like to say is, you can't out-train a bad diet, or you can't, in mental health, you can't outrun a bad diet. How important have you discovered with your work that nutrition is, and that good health is, outside of just, showing up and doing your 45-minute workout every day?
Yeah, there's no doubt that nutrition plays a big role in mood. And there's actually a professor in Victoria called Professor Felice Jacka, and that's been her life's work, looking at whole food diet versus processed food diets, and in particular, looking at young people. And she has found, all other things being equal, that people who have a processed food diet, young people, have a 54% greater chance of anxiety or depression than those that have a whole food diet for younger people.
Yeah.
And that's pretty compelling, isn't it?
That's massive. That's huge. Yet still to this day, we see kids that are served in cafeterias at school processed food on a regular basis.
Absolutely.
Mate, I've really appreciated your candid nature and your the openness of this conversation. But I am curious to know, with the experience that you've gone through and everything you've been through, what's the best piece of advice that you've ever received, in your darkest moments?
I think it was, it was about 2 weeks after a suicide attempt, and I was living with my parents at the time, and I was just feeling really sorry for myself. I was in the kitchen with my mother and saying, why me, why me? And she fixed me with this stare and said, someday you will use this to help other people. I feel emotional talking about it now. And it sounded fanciful at the time. But I think if we can think, how can we use this experience to help others? That's a pathway out. And I know when I went from thinking about me to thinking about we, that was a big transformation.
That's huge. Thank you so much. Graeme, you published 5 books, including Back from the Brink, which was a bestseller, also in China. What are the other books that you've published, mate?
There's 3 books in the Back from the Brink series, and then there's a book called Thriving Naturally, and then a book called We Care. So they're just about how to have things. And one of the other great things that I've done recently as well is creating scalable learning programs in organizations that can really magnify, my message. So it doesn't just rely on me being in a room, but just really shows how to have these more caring teams that do great work together.
And so where can people find out more about this?
They're on my website, graemecowan.com.au. And I also really encourage people to check out the Caring CEO as well, because there's people there from the managing director of Twitter Australia to CEO of Bunnings, CEO of the New South Wales Department of Customer Service. Wow. Just extraordinary leaders that champion both this culture of care and a culture of high performance.
Not sure we'll see Jeff Bezos on there anytime soon, but it does sound incredible. Graeme, I want to thank you, but I also want to acknowledge your courage for the work that you've done, the work you continue to do every day, and you show up. As someone who's experienced my own journey, I know sometimes, things can seem a little bleak, but for someone who's been through what you have, and who continues to do what you do, you are such an important person in our society in this moment, and you are doing such incredible work. And it's been an honor and a pleasure to be able to not only interview you, but to share your message with many other people around the world. We're going to put a whole bunch of links into everything about you, your website, any social media. But yeah, I just want to take the time to say thank you, mate, for the work that you do, because you're saving lives, and that means a lot.
Yeah, thanks, Kerwin. It's a pleasure being on the show, and I'm also aware of the great work you do as well. So back to you as well.
Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Unstoppable today with Graeme Cowan. This episode is brought to you by Nail It and Scale It, the world's leading fast growth program for businesses. If you have ever wanted to grow your business faster than what you can right now, if you need to make more revenue, if you need more leads, if you need more clients, if you need to know how to plan your business in a strategic way in order to hit big goals, if you need to learn how to scale your business and grow your team and your business so that you have more freedom, then this program is for you. Imagine 3 days immersed with me where we cover all aspects of business, but we do it from an immersive but also an execution standpoint. We execute every step of the way, and we're looking at 5 key areas. We're looking at your psychology, we're looking at your marketing, your sales, your leadership, and we're looking at your planning and how we integrate these 5 key areas to grow your business and your brand quickly. So if you'd like to find out more information, kerwinray.com.